Is Mets owner Steve Cohen feeling the pressure for the franchise to end the 40-year title drought? Let's talk all things Cohen and Mets baseball with Tyler Ward, the voice of the Amazins, and of course your favorite Mets content creator. Wardy, appreciate you hopping on with us, man. I know you're excited to get down there to Florida, so I won't hold you up too much. But we gotta talk about it because the man said he is impatient and he wants to end the 8th longest title drought in MLB. But let's start with the news about how he said that he won't name a captain as long as he owns the franchise. So no seal on Lindor or Soto's chest. I've never been on or a part of a team that did not have a captain or captains plural. So how do you and the fan base feel about that decision?
You know, it's a great question, Brandon, because when Mike Puma of our New York Post here asked that question to Steve yesterday, I think Mike and the collective group was actually taken back by the response from Steve. We didn't expect or think he was going to come out bluntly and say verbatim, you know, that there will never be a captain as long as I am owner. And given his evaluation, my theory behind this, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but I'm just connecting the dots a bit. You know, I think of the remarks that former Mets reliever Adam Ottavino shared on a podcast earlier this year, breaking down former Met Brandon Nimmo on how he himself did not love the rumblings of a guy like Francisco Lindor being considered for captaincy because he felt in his own right he's a leader in that clubhouse. And that pretty much is what Steve reiterated in these remarks, stating how the clubhouse is an ever-changing thing on a year-by-year basis, and it's really up to the players to essentially appoint and they want someone to be their unofficial leader because Lindor has been that for a number of years. I'm sure Soto's going to take on a larger role this year. Marcus Semien, one of the rare captains we have seen in baseball as of recent, as he was the captain for the World Series champion Texas Rangers that was actually traded for Brandon Nimmo this past offseason. The Mets have a really wide array of a collective group of veterans that know how to lead in their own ways in this clubhouse. I'm sure that's what Steve Cohen really meant when he said that there's no reason to put a label on one specific individual when we have so many here that bring different types of leadership qualities that are going to bode the club well.
Do you feel like that beef, that clubhouse beef between him and Nimmo kind of messed up his shot regardless if Cohen was even open to having a player be a captain on one of his teams?
You know, I'm really not sure, but I'm first thinking of the following, Brandon. You know, it was last summer or so when the Mets were getting set to, of course, celebrate David Wright on David Wright Day, as we saw. I'm forgetting the exact date, but it wasn't too long ago. And the build-up to David Wright Day was speculation that are the Mets going to consider passing the captaincy baton from Wright to Lindor on his big day? There were some leaks going out on MLB's website on a hype video on captains of the New York Mets, and it had Francisco Lindor at the end of that video. So it caused a lot of speculation and a lot of fans like myself to try to connect the dots. That ultimately didn't happen, and to hear those remarks supposedly regarding Nimmo on how he felt about that circumstance does leave you wondering if that did throw a wrench at all into the Mets' plans at naming a captain. But if we're going to take what Steve Cohen said more with a grain of salt, and truthfully everything he said as fact, he did also reiterate that this is something that he's always felt since the start of becoming owner for this Mets team, which means that this would go well beyond just the remarks that we have known over the past calendar year as to what Brandon Nimmo has felt, maybe was feeling a little wrong about the captaincy status with Lindor, among other things. All I know, though, is that this is a very different clubhouse dynamic. Nimmo, Alonso, Diaz, McNeil, what do these players have in common? They're no longer New York Mets. So the Mets are not going to have that necessarily of a thing to worry about anymore. We'll just see how this dynamic is with Lindor and the other veterans that are now entering this group for 2026.
Yeah, I just find it weird that he won't have a captain because I always compare professional sports locker rooms or clubhouses to like a wolf pack. You know, every wolf within that wolf pack has its job, has its role, but then there's also that alpha that everyone responds to, everyone reports to, and that's who we're supposed to report to your coaches, to your front office. So I just think that that's very weird that he won't name a captain as long as he's an owner. But these are the type of moves that put a lot of pressure on the decision maker or the decision makers to win their way. And when Steve Cohen bought this team, he said that the Mets would win a championship in 5 years. We're already way past that deadline. Cohen is now impatient with this whole 40-year title drought. To add the insult, the 1986 Mets are going to be honored at Citi Field throughout the entire season. So who would you say is facing more pressure this season for this team to be a contender? Cohen, Stearns, or the players?
Naturally, it's a collective thing, right? I mean, it's really hard not to view it that way, but I do
It's
think
New
that there
York.
is
They
a
don't do collective here in New York. They don't do collectives. The finger has to point at one person. If you have to
Okay.
point at one person, who is staring down the barrel of the gun?
It's David Stearns. That's the
Oh,
simple answer that I
okay.
was going to get to. Because, listen, David Stearns is the architect behind this Mets roster. And after completely depleting the core that's been here for the past 5 to 7+ years, this is now more David Stearns' team than it ever has been before. You can't say that the pressure is solely on Cohen because all he does is sign the checks and do everything in his power to bring in top talent. It isn't for a lack of effort on his end. It's just not his fault that a team like the Dodgers can swoop in and basically grab anyone they want because they are who they say they are. When you look at the players on this roster, yes, there's of course a level of pressure and expectation on them as well, but there's a lot of newcomers on the block here. You know, some guys were traded here without asking for it, and other guys signed, of course, on shorter term contracts. So this is really up to David Stearns to see how this roster that he built himself all together, how is it going to look throughout the course of the year? So if the Mets do not have a strong year, do not be surprised if the Mets may find themselves going in a slightly different direction at the helm heading into 2027, because it's one thing to miss playoffs one year, it's another to lose it for back-to-back years. And that's something that, you know, as you know very well, Brandon, in a market like New York, you simply cannot justify consistently, especially when you look at the payroll that the Mets have, the amount of millions upon millions of dollars that Steve Cohen continues to spend. They have to put up or shut up this year, which is why, in my eyes, this is a make or break in various ways for David Stearns and how this roster is going to look throughout the course of the season.
I've seen a lot of videos that are coming out of these workouts. A lot of guys, I mean, dinking it to the parking lot. What would you say is one position player or one pitcher that's kind of stood out in so far this spring?
There's been a lot of players that have looked good so far, which is obviously fun. It's that time of year where everyone's just starting to ramp up and looking good. No stress, hopefully no injuries. We're all having a great time. And a position player that sticks out like a sore thumb to me right away has to be Jorge Polanco, who the Mets signed from the Seattle Mariners this past offseason. Polanco, who signed with the Mets in part because his father actually resides in New York, so that benefited the Mets in their pursuit of the veteran switch hitter. He has been slapping the ball to all fields and has put the ball in play constantly throughout the past week since he's arrived there to Port St. Lucie. I've heard nothing but raving reviews across media and other reporters while they have physically been there in Port St. Lucie, watching Polanco's work and doing a fantastic job in grinding out at bats early, looking like he really hasn't missed a step since the end of his tremendous playoff run with the Mariners last year. And then on the pitching end, you know, there's a young pitcher who's been healthy for a number of months, but has been swept under the rug by fans who I think have disregarded the player because he hasn't pitched since the 2024 season due to reconstructive Tommy John surgery. And that's Christian Scott. I mean, Christian Scott had everyone oohing and eyeing at camp the past 24 hours. He struck out Juan Soto, top 95 on the gun. And what's fun about Christian Scott is he has a high rising fastball, which basically means, Brandon, if he's throwing 95, it's so deceptive to hitters in the way that it rises that it really appears as if it's 97, 98. And he had Soto looking silly, and they're at bat against each other yesterday. So Christian Scott definitely impressing early, utilizing all of his pitch mix, including a cutter that he has now added into the mix since the last time he was on the mound for the Mets at the major league level. He's someone that's really hoping to impact the team in varying degrees, whether it's as a starter, a reliever, a swingman, one of many young starters that the Mets have to choose from throughout the course of the season.
All right, Polanco, Christian Scott. They better retweet this once they find out that you're giving them some love, Wardy. Appreciate you hopping on, man. Can't wait to connect with you when you're down in Port St. Lucie.
Thanks so much, Brandon. Always a pleasure.